नहीं, यही ठीक है, रन दो, ये खराब लग रहा है. Hello, I'm Ajit Kumar Jha, CEO and editor-in-chief of Power Pixar. Today, I wanted to make a very different kind of video, not on any political problem, not on any political event in the world right now, but this typical problem: why do exit polls go wrong? Recently in India, the Haryana exit poll, all the pollsters went wrong. During the Lok Sabha elections that took place fairly recently in India, lots of exit pollsters predicted BJP's numbers in the Lok Sabha between 300 to almost 375, 400, whereas the BJP only ended up getting 240. So, again, in a way, the numbers went wrong. The same thing happens. Look at on 5th November, the American elections are going to take place. The exit polls hasn't happened yet, although polling has begun there. But there are a lot of pre-poll surveys. In fact, in India, in Haryana polls, there were hardly what about half a dozen to, let's say, about 10 exit polls. Pre-polls, again, very few, maybe another half a dozen. In Lok Sabha, there were many more. But again, in India, polls are so expensive that we are, as a poor country, we are not able to afford so many polls. In the US, by contrast, if you see, there are literally hundreds of polls. Every day, scores of poll reports come out, and half of them predict Kamala Harris winning, half of them predict former President Trump winning. Now, obviously, on the 5th of November, once the counting take place, half of them will go wrong. So that is the big question that I wanted to start with, that why is it that so many pollsters go wrong? Of course, the truth is majority of them go right. But what is polling? How is a pre-poll survey different from a post-poll survey? How is a pre-poll survey different from an exit poll? And what is, uh, let's say, the story behind polling? So, first, let me start with India. In India, the first pre poll surveys started almost in 1962. Can you believe it? That was the third Lok Sabha elections in India. The first one was 1952, the second one was 1957, and 1962, the year India China went to war. That year, we had our first poll. Now, that poll was a very small sample. It was done by a small group, and they had just begun and wasn't much significant in terms of either randomization or any of the other methodologies that pollsters use. But by 1967, 1971, two Lok Sabha polls were done with a very large sample, and about 3 to 4 American universities and the Center for Studies in Developing Societies on 29 Rajpur Road, Delhi, which is popularly also known as the Rajni Kothari Center, they did their first pre-poll survey. And by the way, I learned my polling on that, the results of that poll. Why so? Because I was obviously not sort of around when the polling was going on. Actually, I went to study. First, I went to study in England at Oxford, and then from there, I went to study at University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. And when I went, lots of teachers faculty was involved in teaching polling, in teaching statistics, because without knowing statistics, you can't learn polling. And some of the other techniques that I used during polling, and I jumped into it. at Oxford, actually, I used to attend lectures by famous psephologists like Professor Butler, who was also, by the way, in a way, the teacher, one can say, of Prannoy Roy, Ashok Lahiri, and others who started pre-poll surveys in a major way in India. And so I also would attend his lectures and some of the other sort of pollsters that were there in England. But since I did not know mathematics very well, statistics at that time, I just took an interest from the outside. But at UCLA, I had to do a lot of coursework, several courses in statistics, game theory, rational choice, etc. These are sort of courses in methodology. And from there, I trained myself in elections because I fell in love with elections. For a while, before I went to the US, I actually did cover campaigns in far off Nagaland, in Haryana. These were state assembly polls in Maharashtra, because I used to work as an assistant editor in the Hindustan Times. So, given that experience, when I went to the US, I started studying polling. And as I pointed out, I set my hands on this great data set we had of the 1967 and 1971 elections, massive polls. Of course, there is always problems with all polls, which I saw later and realized, but yet some of the best sort of data set to learn polling, I got a chance over there. Later on, of course, from there, I kind of did, I sort of joined the CSDS team for a while with my friend Yogender Yadav. Then I joined later on in journalism, I joined India Today, and India Today was heavily into polling, and therefore I worked with several pollsters throughout my life. So let me point out, there is a basic difference between the question I began. What is the difference between a pre-poll survey and an exit poll? Both the polls rely on what we call random sampling. And by the way, random sampling doesn't mean just go around talking to people randomly. No, there are actually specialized tables which exist called random tables, which are generated by experts who do randomization, who are, maybe PhD in statistics and in mathematics. And from that, you start. Let me simplify, because this might be a bit complex for those who are not trained in numbers. So what do you do? Let me start with a polling booth. A polling booth in India normally has let's say about 1,000 voters. So you pre-decide how many people you are going to do a sample of. When you sample, you do a number. And mind you, you cannot start with a small number. You have to start with at least 50 to 100 people in one area, let's say in a polling booth. And why is that so? Because in statistics, there is a law. And the law says, it's called the law of large numbers, that when you do randomization on a unit which has a fairly large number, let's say a minimum of 50 or maybe even 100, then you arrive at a better prediction. The reason is, it's almost like take a coin and start flipping, heads or tail, heads or tail. If you flip it 5 times, you might get all heads or all tails. But if you flip it, let's say 100 times, then there are better chances that you'll probably end up getting, let's say, 45 heads, 55 tails, or the other way around. What is happening? The more the number of times you flip it, the more the chances that the median point of that will be an accurate 50-50. Now, these all require, why is that so? Let me just give an example. In the world, number of men and number of women, if you take in the entire world, it will come very near to 50-50. Even within a country, of course, there is a big debate on how the women have been undercounted in India, or the number of women are less. But the difference in large sample is just a matter of few percentage points. So it might be 48-52, 48 women to 52 men. In a state like Kerala, it might be the other way around because the number of women are higher than the men. In Haryana, perhaps it might be 95 or even less women to, let's say, more men, 105 or 110 men. So these things one can go into later. But the reason I'm pointing this out is that in nature, there is a kind of random distribution on which pollsters rely. What you are trying to do, you're trying to talk to a sample of people. You collect a random sample through this method that I was explaining in the polling booth. What do? Suppose 1,000 polls, there are 1,000 people in that. So you divide, let's say, 1,000 by 50, and you arrive at what, about 20 number. So if from the first random table you get the number, let's say 25, then you keep adding 20 to it. So you speak to the 25th voter, you add 20 to it, the 45th voter, then you add 20 to it, the 65th voter, and you go on and so on and so forth. Now, usually what happens, that those who understand statistics, they will do it themselves, right? But then you cannot do very large, you can't go across the country each time and do it yourself. So you build up a team. In the West, what happens when they do randomization, or in academic, let's say, centers like CSDS, many of the researchers are PhD students who are trained in this entire process. So they do it rather accurately. But when you just sort of build samples in the media, for example, there is you're short of resources, you're short of time. You just gather people who will go and ask the set of questions that you prepared to the people that you have randomized. They sometimes go there, and for example, suppose you tell them to go and interview number 20th voter. They go there, and the Mr. 20th or the lady who's the number 20th voter is not available. They'll go to the next one and go and talk to them, the 21st or the 23rd or the 29th, whoever is available. And that destroys the randomization of the sampling. It contaminates it, and the results that you will get, you'll probably get it wrong. So that is one reason why polling, both pre-poll surveys and exit polls, can go wrong. But then there is a deeper reason, and I wanted to go into that deeper reason. Let's go back to the Haryana polls. What happened in the Haryana polls? Between the Congress party and the BJP in the final results, the difference was 0.8%. Remember, 0.8%, which is basically 120,000 votes of entire Haryana. Now, when it is 0.8%, it is within the margin of error of +3, -3. In any sample in the world, however large you take, whether you take a sample of 1 crore voters or you take a sample like the American pollsters do of 1,300 voters, the confidence interval is always 97%, which in other words means you can go wrong plus or -3% from the point of prediction. Now, think of it, 0.8, and you can go wrong plus or -3. So therefore, almost all the pollsters went wrong because it was such a tight fight in the Haryana election between the Congress and the BJP. Now, the interesting question is, which a friend of mine, very intelligent, from IIT, IIM, who was a former CEO, he asked me, he said, Ajit, why did all the pollsters give the same result? Why did all of them go wrong in Haryana? And the answer to that is, if you look back at the Haryana polls, the Congress party in the year 2014 assembly elections got 21% vote. By the time 2019 assembly election took place, the Congress party ended up getting 28% vote. So a jump of 7%. And then if you look at 2024, the last election, the Congress party got 39.09% vote. Now, as I said, I think it was 39.02% vote. And the BJP got 39.9%. So the difference was a barely 0.8%, something along those lines. Maybe there is a 0.1% difference here. So, as I said, the difference between the two parties was 1,20,000. Now, what has happened? What is hidden in that is that from 2019, Congress jumped from 28% to, let's say, almost 39%. That is a solid surge increase of 11%. The BJP only increased 3.5%. Now, what do pollsters, when the fight is so tight, and remember that's the average, there are certain constituencies where the BJP candidate won by 32 votes. Imagine a size of a Lok Sabha size in India can be several lakhs. Even an assembly, 5 to 7 assembly seats, let's say, in every Lok Sabha, is also a few lakhs. Now, in that, if someone is winning by 32 votes, how do you reach accurate results when the margin of error can be plus or minus 3%? So that's where the mistake happened. The pollsters saw the surge in Congress from 2014 to 2019, from 21 to 28%, and 2019 to 2024, almost 11%. And the BJP, which was the incumbent, which rose very little, they were assuming anti-incumbency, and therefore they went with the surge, and they ended up predicting a wrong result. Now, there is another deeper problem here, because it's a very complex subject. See, what happens is all algorithms in this world, when you do a survey, you can only reach a relatively accurate prediction of percentage vote. You can never get exact seat from percentage vote. And why is the reason? In India, we have the first past the post system. So a party, the winning party, can move between, let's say, about 33% vote to 49, 50% vote and win the election. Okay? Even if you get, because we have almost a multi-party system, even if you have one party reaching 33, 34, 35%, and that happens quite often in India, it wins the election. But it does not get 33, 34, 35% seats. It ends up getting sometimes 50%, 60%, 65% seats. That's called the Cube law, which we will go explain in maybe another video why that happens. But therefore it is almost impossible to get the seats right. All you can do is through the sort of methods of good sampling, to the methods of randomization, through a rigorous analysis of the data. And remember, the randomization here is not any simple random. It's generally a randomized, stratified randomized sample, which means you sort of stratify it by caste, by class, by education, by gender, so that in the so-called final sample that you are interviewing, you have at least 50% men, 50% women. You try to get the caste composition right. You follow the sort of census figures. I mean, the last census figures we have on caste is still 1931, but you kind of interpolate on that. You look at the several other caste surveys done in India individually. You look at those figures and try and sort of randomize. So basically, it's a very complex exercise. And India being perhaps the most culturally diverse country in this world and huge populations, it's very difficult to arrive at any kind of sort of conclusive, final result. Now, you might ask the question, if it is so complex, then why do pollsters give seat numbers? If it is almost impossible to get the seat numbers right, why don't they just give the percentage vote? The reason, my dear viewers, is if you go in front of the television and we just tell you BJP will get this percentage vote X and Congress will get Y percentage vote, or Samajwadi Party will get Z percentage vote, you will switch the TV off. All of us, what do we want to know? We want to know the exact seats. It's like cricket, jitega ya harega. You can't just say, oh, his batting average is very good or his bowling average is very good. These are academic points. The real point is, jitega kaun? So the same problem happens in elections. Jitega kaun? Kaun banega Pradhanmantri? Kaun banega Mukhyamantri? That is what people are interested in. So there is enormous pressure on pollsters and on media channels, because they are the ones who kind of show the results of polls on newspapers, on social media sites like mine, for example. We all try our level best from different sources and arrive at some figure which can go wrong, like it went in the Haryana assembly polls, or went wrong again. Let's say not completely. After all, BJP did win, which most pollsters had presented, but they had given a huge number. Remember, even well-known names. I mean, Prashant Kishore is not exactly a pollster, but he had said BJP ko 300 se zyada aega. Yogendra Yadav, a friend of mine actually, with whom I have done polling, he said 240 ke kareeb hi pahuncha, but then he thought that the BJP may not be able to form the government, which was again wrong. So what I'm saying, there are reasons why people go wrong, but let me point out that surveys, all kinds of surveys, especially pre-poll surveys, according to me, and post-poll surveys, not so much exit polls, they are the best techniques available, scientific surveys available to understand voter preferences. They don't only tell you who's winning, who's losing. They also tell you what kind of voters, for example, prefer the BJP over what kind of voters prefer the Congress. Their sociological background, their gender background, a sociological background in terms of caste, in terms of religion, in terms of different communities, in terms of even things like income bracket, education. Because, in pre-poll surveys, you can make very large questionnaires. I have done several such pre-poll surveys, and sometimes in my ambition to know and arrive at a better truth, I would pack the survey with between 50 to 80 questions. Now that's only possible in a pre-poll survey, where the pollsters or election analysts go to the spot, or used to in the past go to the spot and talk to sort of people and find out several things before they would ask the last question, which way are you going to vote? Now, in exit poll, you cannot do that. Why? Because the exit poll is done at the point when people have already voted. They are coming out after voting, they are coming out, and you catch them. And the randomization is also not as good as pre-poll survey, because what you can do is you can say, okay, I will rely on every 10th person coming out of the poll. But that is not as good as a scientific randomization done at the polling booth level with the list and the name of the voter. So what usually exit polls try to do to get rid of the noise, they go for a larger sample. You might have heard of exit polls relying on, for example, in Lok Sabha, 1 crore voters. They have, for example, pollsters in every state, in almost all constituencies, and they go on and aggregating those numbers and come to some results, and yet they can go wrong, because as I pointed out, all of it is basically only good enough to tell you the percentage vote, not the number of seats. So that's a big mistake. My final point is that when I started doing surveys back at UCLA, and then I came to India and I started from 95 consistently, I did. We would go to the spot. We would talk to the voters. I myself, for example, have done a survey where I have covered certain constituencies, done polling by talking to the people and finding out. And by the way, that was the 1995 Bihar State Assembly polls. And our poll predicted 35% vote for the RJD. We were accurate almost to 2 points. The RJD ended up getting 6.5% vote. So those were the very accurate polls. Now what they do, there is a problem because polling costs a lot, and there are not much funding agencies who get involved. So people do telephone surveys, and I can go at length, on why telephone surveys are not as good as real surveys. One of the biggest problem of telephone surveys is if you have to, let's say, poll 10,000 voters, you have to phone about more than 1 lakh people, because most people, when they hear the fourth question, either the telephone line gets cut or they just cut the line. And as a result, people don't trust you. People in India still don't trust people when they don't see them face to face. When they hear them on the telephone, they think you are wasting their time. So all those problems also gets in, and as a result, you find more polls going wrong today than in the past. I will go into this again in a different manner in another video. But what I will request you is to please subscribe to this channel, like, and possibly send some feedback through the YouTube, where you can actually click and where to send your reply, and tell me what you liked and what different you would like to see in another video. Thank you very much. This is from Power Pixar channel, the Ajit Angle. Thank you. End stream immediately, and you will no longer be live. End.